Hi, I'm Reed. This is Crowline Publishing. Welcome back to Lore, our series on taking folklore, mythology, history, social custom, all that sort of cool stuff, and mining them for our tabletop role-playing game experiences. Now, as you can see, my barbers have not got space for me yet, so I'm not going to be on camera a whole lot for this one, but funeral processions, lore, let's go. So here's how it works. 5 bits of folklore, 5 adventure ideas. And let's start off with a great one. Number 1 is vampire burials. These turn up all the time in the press. They're very interesting. They should probably be called revenant burials rather than vampire burials. Vampires are specific things. Revenant just means someone who comes back from the dead. But from France to Turkey to China to the Solomon Islands, all around the world, we find evidence that some people, for whatever reason, were a locus of dread within their life. Something happened within their life. Maybe it was disease, maybe it was a reputation, maybe it was something they did, but they become necessary to chain down within death. Someone was afraid that they would return from the dead. And we find lots of examples of how this has been taken care of. The Sumba cemetery of babies in Italy had a lot of infants that were tied up, chained up. We find people with stakes in their hearts. The one that I always remember and sort of focus on because I have a great dread of this is that a woman had had a brick put into her mouth after she had died. Someone was afraid of her biting after she had died. So these dead bodies become sources of absolute dread and fear, not in and of themselves, but because of the potential for them to return from the dead. Now, if you're doing a Ttrpg, this has some fairly basic implications, and we'll get to those in time. Number 2 is wearing black, specific ritual items that you wear at a funeral. These are called sumptuary laws and sumptuary traditions, and we get wearing black from Romans. Now, the toga pulla, the dark toga, is probably the most formal garment any Roman would ever own. It was worn specifically at funerals, and they dye it black, and I've heard 2 reasons why dyeing it black is specifically so important. The first is that black dye was very hard and expensive to make, so it shows that you are really wearing your absolute best. This is the most formal that you can be. You are in the presence of death. This is a very big deal. And the other is it's to show that you have covered yourself in dirt from the grave, that you are somehow partaking deeply in this ritual of death. Now, it's considered very, very rude to go to the funeral feast and to the wake in that same toga, like get stabbed kind of rude. Now, the reason why clothes are very, very important is because it shows that you are entering into a really, really ritualized space. Death is some of the heaviest stuff any of us will ever deal with. You must come to these mourning traditions formally. And if you don't, well, we'll get to that during the adventures. Number 3 is church grims and graveyard guardians. Now, there's an old tradition that basically no one ever goes to heaven until the last trumpet sounds and doomsday comes. So your soul stays in your body until that blessed day. So you need something to protect your soul from the devil. So the ancient tradition is that the first person buried in a graveyard, the first person into sacred ground, stays behind to see off the devil, to fight off the forces of evil that want to drag your souls down to hell. Now, no one wants that to happen to them, so people would often take a black hound and would ritually sacrifice it, poor wee dog, and bury it in the graveyard, and that dog, its ghost then protects the graveyard, and that is the church grim. It is a ghost that is actively out to protect us from evil spiritual forces. Now, it wasn't just dogs. You also find grey sows, grey pigs, lambs, and all the rest of it. But the idea is that this creature is ritually sacrificed for the good of communities to keep our souls safe within their graveyards until the gods can come and lift them up to heaven. Number 4 is sin eating. Now, it's perhaps best well known as an Italian custom, but sin eating exists all over the world. You find it in China, you find it in religions that don't even have particularly much emphasis on sin and death, and focus more on rebirth and reincarnation, like Buddhism. But even the Aztecs had a unpleasant version of this, a ritual to the goddess of sluts and excrement. Moving on, the idea is that someone dies, but before you bury them, you prepare a special feast or even just a specific special magical meal. And that food symbolically becomes the sins of that person's life. Then you take someone called a sin eater, and they ritually eat that meal, and the sins move into their body, into their soul, and the dead person, of course, can move on to the afterlife cleaner and less evil, and therefore less likely to go to hell. But Of course, the sin eater is left behind with double the sins, triple the sins the next time they eat. So sin eaters themselves are these eerie, liminal figures. They are very unwelcome. They are often beggars. They were paid a handful of coins and a meal and told to sod off. They were not welcome in communities. Number 5 is Tanataraja. Now, in East Indonesia, which is a fantastic place for folklore, funerals are hugely culturally important for a few reasons, but probably the biggest is that you are not considered dead until you are actually fully buried. And in fact, you're still part of the family. Your body is kept close at hand, often in the house. Sometimes it is even fed and offered meals. It is consulted for advice. It becomes a part of your daily religious life, as this body, your grandma's body, your dad's body, is suddenly an idol. It is suddenly a location of your daily religious worship. And the reason that they keep bodies is that funerals are really, really expensive, and you are not considered dead until you are buried. And these graves, well, you can't actually just take a body and put it in the ground because you need it for various reasons. And one of these is that you must decorate the body, and you must decorate its graveside with idols, art, flowers, food, statues, and loads of stuff. And this demonstrates how important and loved the dead were. So, you keep a body around the house, and slowly but surely, there's no sort of set ending. You bury it. You do the funeral over 5 years, 10 years. And then every few years, there is actually a festival where these important and loved bodies are taken from out of their graves, they are cleaned up, and they are dressed in their Sunday best, and they are paraded around town to show them what is going on in the land of the living. Okay, now 5 adventure ideas on the folklore theme of funerals and graves. Number 1. Your players run across a town, make allies with a community that have strong traditions of necromancy. Perhaps everyone in the community is cursed, perhaps they worship an undead god, whatever, but they're not evil. They just have a long habit of resurrecting their dead and making them again parts of their families. And these undead are offered what they eat freely, a bit of experience, a bit of blood, a bit of souls, whatever. Then your PCs have no reason to actually conflict with them. They don't do anything bad. Then one day a priest or a colonist or a cop or whatever finds this community and says, the undead are a spiritual blight, we must kill them. Will your players defend this community of mummies and necromancers, or will they go against their own church and their own teachings? A local necromancer is digging up bodies and then reburying them. Alright, this is pretty weird. Why would a necromancer put a body back in the grave? But the thing is the necromancer is adjusting the bodies strangely within their tombs. And now you can find the necromancer and stop them. That's not really a big deal. But the deal is that all these bodies being put in the wrong ritual positions is actually creating a vast sort of knot of necromantic energy, and something terrible is coming. You need to restore these bodies back to their traditional ways of being buried, or suffer something really dark, Nightwalker or something coming. Number 3, a nun or a priest or a cleric or something says, okay, I oversee a temple. You PCs, can you come and help me? Because I keep seeing a monstrous black shadowy hound running around the graveyard, and I'm pretty sure it's evil. Alright, no big deal, says the PCs, all in a night's work. But in fact, this is of course the church grim. It's trying to protect the church. And perhaps it's even trying to protect the church from that priest, from that nun, whoever's hired the PCs, because something very powerful is within the church. And that the church grim is the last thing standing between this evil priest and whatever is buried beneath the altar. Number 4. Finding clothes and robes and cloaks is a very big deal in D&D specifically. So you get one. It's very, very important. It's very, very cool. It's a robe of the Archmage or whatever. There's loads and loads of cloaks within D&D itself that have magical ritual properties. But you start wearing it all around. It's a fantastic bit of kit. But what you don't realize is it's actually a funeral garment from a very ancient tradition, from a very ancient civilization or a monstrous lich cult. And then one day, your PCs are just at an everyday religious festival. Maybe it's a funeral. It should be a funeral. And they have worn this sumptuous garment, but it has very, very specific ritual meanings, and the local spirits, the local gods, the local devils and demons notice, and it all goes terribly, terribly wrong, and the terrible rift in death opens, all because you have ignored the ritual meaning of your own clothes and your own robes and your own adventuring kit. An important lesson in PCs dressing well. Number 5. So Vampire attacks in the neighborhood. This is not a big deal. PCs will have seen this kind of stuff before. You're finding bodies missing, turn up with no blood, fang marks. It's vampires. Now, that's no big deal, but a visiting inquisitor or priest comes along and says, look, I am very worried. I think this is going to be a very real vampire plague. I've read the omens. We need to go and we need to dig up a whole bunch of bodies and stake them because I do not know who this master vampire is. But here's the thing, here's the twist. The inquisitor is actually a worshipper of, or even a somehow can walk around during the day, vampire child of the now trapped vampire master. The inquisitor is trying to dig up this really, really huge vampire lord, and sooner or later, some little peasant is going to open up the wrong grave, and then the great evil will walk beneath the moon once again. You might want to look up something called the Highgate Vampire Incident. Very interesting. So there we go. 5 bits of funeral folklore, 5 bits of graveyard folklore, 5 adventure hooks. If you liked it, give us a like, give us a share, give us a subscribe. I'm Reed. I'll see you next time. Bye now.